Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
Well, the federal election results are in, almost. We're still waiting on a few too-close-to-call ridings to determine whether the Liberal government, headed up by Mark Carney, will be a minority. Currently, at recording time, it's at 168 seats. Or do they manage to clear the 172-seat threshold for a majority? Well, the financial markets seem to be waiting on that. There's actually been very little movement for the Canadian dollar, holding at 72 cents U.S. But how the government now maneuvers through a trade war will be a focus for traders and interest rate speculation. Welcome to a special post-election edition of In This Economy. My name is Mike Eppel, and joining me on the line is Randall Bartlett, Deputy Chief Economist at Desjardins. Randall, are you surprised that there hasn't really been as much reaction to the vote, considering the polls were pointing to a majority outcome, and now with a likely minority comes extra bargaining that could be required in the House of Commons?
Yeah, I mean, looking at the market reaction, I think what we saw off the hop was that we did see a steepening in the yield curve. So rise in interest rates at the longer end of the yield curve. Now, it wasn't huge, but we saw some movement at that. And I think the expectation is that now that we're in a minority government situation, there was already going to be more debt issued to pay for larger deficits that the Carney Liberals plan to run. But now that it's in a minority government situation, the Liberals may need to work with the NDP or the Bloc to pass legislation, which could mean more spending on the table. So I think there was a bit of a reaction on the debt side, just digesting the fact there may be more issuance than expected. And when it comes to the Canadian dollar, there was a modest depreciation at the outset, but pretty minor to your point. So I think that a Liberal victory was expected, but and generally it was a strong minority government. So we'll see how it rolls out. But I think markets will be digesting this for a little while, and we may get the bigger reaction once the budget gets tabled.
Well, here's the thing: there's this discussion. You mentioned it about working with the NDP or the Bloc. This, I have the feeling, and what Mark Carney has telegraphed is they're going to be a more centrist Liberal government. They've got some, big plans on infrastructure and maybe even pipelines and all these things. They could theoretically garner support from the Conservatives if just, 3 or 4 say, yeah, that's. Yes, of course, you're going to have your hardline members of Parliament on the Conservative side who will never agree to anything the Liberals do. But there might be some crossover, if you will, within a voting on government support issue.
Yeah, I think that there was a lot of overlap, actually, between the Liberal and the Conservative platforms, particularly around tax policy. So when it came to getting rid of the GST on new housing under certain conditions, and reducing the lowest personal income tax rate, reversing the increase in the capital gains inclusion rate. I think there's a lot of agreement on those aspects of tax policy between the two parties, and so hope springs eternal that pragmatism will trump partisanship, but I don't know if that's necessarily going to be the case. There hasn't been a strong track record of that in the House of Commons, especially in recent years. So we'll see what happens. But certainly there's room, I think, for agreement on the tax side between the Liberals and the Conservatives, and on the spending side between the Liberals and the NDP and the Bloc. So there is opportunity for collaboration to some extent across the party. So we'll see how they want to play their cards.
Some of this might also have to do with whether or not Poilievre hangs around. I mean, he says he's going to, but he made those comments before he lost the seat or the riding. If the Conservatives do what they've done in the past and eat their own, they're going to be leaderless for goodness knows how long, and then no one then is going to be pushing for an election. So that might even take a little bit less, take a little less pressure off the Liberals from a governing standpoint.
I think it's interesting. I mean, the Conservatives outperformed the polls, performed very well overall relative to their historical vote share, and I think they have a bigger war chest than any of the other parties coming out of this election. And so, if any political party be ready for another election, it's going to be the Conservatives. And I think just given their strong base of support and the resources they have at their disposal, they may be game for going to an election again sooner than later. Particularly if if Pierre Poilievre wants to stay on as leader and wants to gain a seat. Unless he does so in a by-election, maybe they'll be ready to go to an election again sometime soon.
What is your best guess on the time frame now? Plans for a cabinet, speech from the throne, budget? Do we get a budget in the next couple of months, maybe? I mean, Poilievre was talking about reconvening Parliament for the summer. Many of Carney's re-elected MPs are veterans of the cabinet. So how quickly do you expect him to, and of course, Trump's going to say something, God knows what, on social media each and every day. How quickly do you expect him to reconvene, with the business of governing in Ottawa?
Yeah, I mean, my expectation is that they're going to reconvene almost immediately and begin governing right away. We saw this when Carney became Liberal leader, that ultimately a cabinet was sworn in very, very quickly, and they started taking measures to implement what he could at that time, the same day that the cabinet was sworn in. So I think that we'll see things move ahead very quickly. To your point, they have a lot of experience around the cabinet table, or they will, and so ultimately they'll be able to move forward on, I think, on a throne speech and a budget very, very quickly. So we're expecting probably, toward the end of May, beginning of June, that we should see a budget tabled. And enabling legislation passed fairly quickly. The House is set to rise on June 20th. So June 20th is the last sitting day, and so we'll see if they want to extend the session. But my expectation is we'll see a budget as quickly as they're able to get it together, and ultimately they'll aim to pass legislation by June 20th and help to meet some of the other commitments, such as reducing federal regulation that are considered barriers to internal trade by July 1st. So there's a lot on the table that's been committed to, and I think they're going to push hard to make it happen before.
Any guess who the finance minister would be?
I don't know who the finance minister will be, to be honest. I think there's a lot of talent that is in the Liberal caucus, and there's some new talent that's come in as well. And so I think we'll see how that shapes up. But regardless, I think it's going to be a smaller cabinet than certainly was under the Trudeau administration, looking more like the cabinet that Carney swore in after he became leader. And it's going to be, I think, very much focused on delivering on some of the key elements of the Liberal election plan.
Having said that, whomever the finance minister is, that first budget is, when we look at what's transpired just over the past several months, you've had the elimination, the GST, HST tax holiday, the elimination of the capital gains tax, the plunging price for oil, the elimination of the carbon tax, but still the carbon tax rebates. That first budget is going to be, from a deficit standpoint, probably a bit of a mess.
I think certainly at the Liberal election platform is what the budget looks like. I mean, we could see deficits larger on average by about $20 billion annually, and see the debt to GDP ratio rise pretty consistently over the projection. And so, we're hoping to see that, a lot of the measures that were in the Liberal election platform that, seem really focused on micro-targeting select demographic groups are sort of put to the side for the time being, and the focus is on measures that are going to invest in trade supporting infrastructure, things like housing, tax cuts to boost productivity, and focus on investing in defense. And so really focus on the core deliverables that were in the platform, and leaving some of the ancillary measures to the side until we see how the trade war shapes up over the next year.
Randall, appreciate your time this morning.
Thanks, Mike.
That's Randall Bartlett, Deputy Chief Economist at Desjardins. My name is Mike Eppel. Thank you very much for listening to this special edition of In This Economy. You can send us your feedback on this episode or any other episode by emailing me at mike.eppel@rci.rogers.com, or follow me on X at Eppman, EPPMAN. Again, thanks for listening.